If you really want to know who I am, don't look at the rumors, look at the message. I never claim to be perfect, but I've always believed one thing. Faith should lift people, not break them. My message has always been hope, not controversy. When people talk about me, they talk about the stadiums, the lights, the broadcast, the smile, the positivity, and the size of the ministry. They talk about the influence, the millions of followers, the best-selling books, the television reach, and the constant conversations around my name. What they don't talk about is the purpose behind everything, the heart of the message, the private battles behind every public sermon, the sleepless nights behind every word of encouragement. The truth is simple. I never set out to be controversial. I set out to give people hope. Not the kind of hope that is shallow or temporary. Not the kind that says life will always be perfect. But the kind of hope that convinces a broken person that life is still worth living, that tomorrow can still be better than today, and that God has not abandoned them even when everything looks dark. For some people, that message is too simple. For others, it's too optimistic. But for millions of hurting people, it's exactly what they needed to hear. When I first stepped onto the stage after my father passed away, I didn't walk up there with a strategy, a plan, or a brilliant idea of how the ministry should operate. I stepped up with trembling hands and a heart full of uncertainty. I didn't know if people would accept me. I didn't know if I could preach. I didn't even know if I belonged on that stage. But what I did know was that people were hurting, and they weren't looking for someone with perfect theology. They were looking for someone who could shine a little light into their darkness. And that became my spiritual assignment, to speak hope into hopeless places. People often ask why my sermons sound positive, why I focus more on blessings than battles, why I talk more about rising than falling, why I emphasize God's goodness instead of God's judgment, why I encourage instead of confront. It's not because I deny reality or ignore hardship. It's because I've met thousands of people who already feel like life is beating them down. They already know what's wrong. They don't need a preacher to remind them of their failures. They need someone to remind them that God sees them, God loves them, and God has something better for them. And despite what critics say, hope is not denial. Hope is not ignoring pain. Hope is not pretending everything is perfect. Hope is choosing to believe that the pain is not permanent. Every week I meet people battling depression, addiction, sickness, financial struggles, broken marriages, and generational wounds. They come to church not to be condemned, but to be lifted. They come not to be judged, but to be renewed. They come not to be told how bad they are, but to be reminded how valuable they are. And that is why my messages sound the way they do. Because behind every sermon is a real person who needs something to hold on to. Some preach fire, I preach future. Some preach warnings, I preach possibilities. Some preach the weight of human failure, I preach the promise of God's faithfulness. And yes, it frustrates some people. Yes, it confuses traditional thinkers. Yes, it irritates those who want a harder tone. But I've learned that people don't change through fear, they change through faith. When you tell someone God is angry, they hide. When you tell someone God is for them, they rise. And I've always wanted people to rise. Hope is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. It's what keeps a struggling mother going. It's what keeps a broken man from giving up. It's what keeps a teenager from falling into despair. It's what keeps a sick person believing for better days. It's what keeps a dreamer moving forward when the world tells them to stop. And that's why I preach it without apology. People may disagree with my approach, and that's okay. They may say it's too positive. They may say it lacks depth. But I measure the value of my message not by the opinions of critics, but by the testimonies of transformed lives. When someone tells me they were on the edge of giving up and a message helped them hold on, that matters. When someone says they walked into Lakewood defeated and walked out believing again, that matters. When someone says they were battling depression and found the strength to keep going, that matters. Hope works. Hope heals. Hope rebuilds. Hope restores. Hope renews. That's why I preach it. I've learned that the world has enough negativity without me adding to it. The media has enough fear. The culture has enough division. People have enough battles in their minds. And if I can offer even one moment of peace, one sentence of encouragement, one message that says, you're not alone and you're not finished, then I've fulfilled my purpose. I'm not perfect. My ministry isn't perfect. My message isn't perfect. But the intention behind it is pure, to help people believe again. And if that is controversial, then let it be. Because at the end of the day, I'd rather be remembered for giving people hope than for winning an argument. I'm not a celebrity. I'm a messenger. One of the greatest misconceptions about my life is the idea that I somehow chased fame, pursued influence, or built a platform with the goal of becoming a celebrity. The truth is almost the opposite. I never saw myself as a public personality. I never dreamed of being in the spotlight. I never wanted to be the face of a global ministry. In fact, before I stepped into the pulpit, I was completely comfortable working behind the scenes, editing videos, managing the television ministry, and doing the quiet work no one sees. So when people say I'm a celebrity pastor, I smile, not because it's true, but because it couldn't be further from my intention. I didn't step into ministry to be known. I stepped into ministry because I felt called. I didn't start preaching to build a brand. I started preaching to build people. I didn't pick up the microphone for recognition. I picked it up because my father left a legacy that needed to continue, and there were souls waiting for encouragement. When the church began to grow rapidly, I was overwhelmed, not excited. I wasn't thinking about numbers or fame. I was thinking about responsibility. Millions of people tuning in means millions of people depending on the message. Millions of people watching means millions of hurting hearts looking for something real. And that's what transformed my understanding of ministry. It wasn't about me. It was about the assignment. And here's the truth. God doesn't give platforms for popularity. He gives platforms for purpose. If fame comes with purpose, that's fine. If influence comes with assignment, that's fine. But none of it means anything if the message is lost. And the message has always been bigger than me. I'm just the voice delivering it. I'm not the source. I'm just the messenger. People often assume that a large church means a desire for attention. But the size of Lakewood didn't happen because I marketed myself. It happened because people were hungry for hope. The church didn't grow because of me. It grew because people heard something that resonated with their pain, their dreams, and their faith. They came because they needed something from God, not something from me. I've learned that leadership becomes dangerous when you start believing your own spotlight, when you forget why you started, when you confuse applause with purpose. That's why I remind myself every day, I'm a servant before I'm a speaker. I'm a messenger before I'm a leader. I'm a steward before I'm an influencer. If people clap, that's fine. If people criticize, that's fine too. But neither applause nor criticism defines me. What defines me is obedience. Obedience to the calling to encourage, uplift, and strengthen people through the message of hope. And let me be clear, influence is not ownership. The platform isn't mine. It belongs to God. The audience isn't mine. They belong to God. The message isn't mine. It belongs to God. I'm simply entrusted with delivering it faithfully. And when I look back at the journey, I don't see a rise to fame. I see a series of unexpected steps, uncomfortable moments, divine assignments, and God-given opportunities that were never planned by me, but perfectly orchestrated by Him. That's why I don't carry the weight of trying to impress people. I carry the weight of trying to be responsible with what's been placed in my hands. Some people hear positivity and think it's superficial. Some see the smile and think it's performance. Some see the crowds and think it's pride. But if they could see the behind the scenes moments, The tears, the prayers, the responsibility, the spiritual battles, they'd understand that this is not fame. This is calling. This is stewardship. This is service. That's why I say I'm not a celebrity. I'm a messenger. Because at the end of the day, when the lights are off and the cameras stop rolling, what matters isn't how many people know my name. What matters is how many people met God's love through the message. I don't preach fire, I preach future. There is a reason my sermons sound different, a reason the tone is warmer, the delivery softer, and the message more forward-looking than many expect. It's not because I avoid hard truths or pretend life is easy. It's because I've seen what fear does to people, and I've seen what faith can restore. Growing up in church, I heard many powerful sermons. Some were full of conviction, others full of warning, and still others full of deep theological analysis. Those messages shaped me, and I honor them. But as I stepped into my own ministry, I discovered that people weren't coming to me for more fear. They were coming for a reason to try again. The world already tells people they're not enough. Their past already haunts them. Their mistakes already weigh heavy in their minds. The voice of condemnation already follows them everywhere they go. So when I speak, my goal is not to add another weight to their shoulders. My goal is to lift the one they already carry. That's why I say I don't preach fire, I preach future. It's easy to tell someone what's wrong in their life. It doesn't take spiritual depth to point out people's failures or weaknesses. It doesn't take revelation to highlight what's broken. But it does take courage to look someone in the eye, someone who feels like their mistakes have destroyed their destiny, and say, your story isn't over. God still has something ahead for you. That message has power. People rise when you remind them of their future. I've met people who have spent years under the weight of guilt, people who made a mistake in their 20s and believed they were disqualified for life, people who lost their marriage and thought God couldn't use them again, people who went through addiction, loss, failure, and became convinced they were no longer worthy of hope. And then they heard a message that told them the opposite. A message that said, you are not what you did. You are who God says you are. You see, preaching isn't about describing the fire around someone's life. It's about showing them the path through it. It's not about reminding them where they fell. It's about reminding them where they can rise. It's not about locking them in the past. It's about unlocking their future. People don't need fuel for their fear. They need fuel for their faith. And I've watched what happens when someone hears words that point toward destiny instead of disaster. I've seen men rebuild their families, women rediscover their strength, young people regain confidence, broken hearts begin healing, all because they heard a message that didn't end with judgment, but with hope. Some say that preaching about the future ignores the truth of sin. I believe it acknowledges the truth of God's grace. Some say it's too positive. I believe it's powerfully biblical. Some say it's unrealistic. I believe it's transformational. Because the truth is this: God doesn't just save people from something. He saves them for something. And when people understand there is a purpose ahead of them, they start living differently. They start expecting differently. They start praying differently. They start becoming who they were meant to be. I once spoke to a man who told me he had given up on life. He had made mistakes, lost his job, and felt like a failure as a husband and a father. I thought God was done with me, he said. But then I heard you say that God can do more with a repentant heart than with a perfect performance. That changed everything. He didn't need fear. He didn't need condemnation. He needed a future. And that's why I preach the way I do. Because people already know the fire. They live in it daily. The fire of stress, of loss, of failure, of insecurity. My role is not to intensify the flames. It is to show them the way out. There's a scripture that says, encourage one another and build each other up. I take that seriously. I don't want to build fear. I want to build people. I want to build hope, courage, faith, identity, and destiny. Some may misunderstand it. Some may criticize it, but the results speak louder than the criticism. People are rising. People are healing. People are changing. Hope doesn't weaken a person. It strengthens them. Encouragement doesn't shallow a message. It deepens a soul. Positivity doesn't deny reality. It declares possibility. And at the end of the day, that's what the gospel is, a message of possibility. A message of resurrection, restoration, renewal, and redemption. So yes, I don't preach fire. I preach future. Because that's what people need to walk into the life God created for them. My church isn't perfect, but it's open to everyone. One of the most misunderstood things about Lakewood Church is its size. When people see a large building, thousands of seats, big screens, and global broadcasts, they assume it must be polished, corporate, or exclusive. But if you walk through the doors, truly walk through, you'll see something different. You'll see people from every walk of life. People who look like they have everything together, sitting beside people who barely made it through the week. People with money sitting beside people who slept in their car. Business owners sitting beside recovering addicts. People who feel strong sitting beside people barely holding on. Lakewood isn't perfect, it's human. And that's exactly why it's open. I've always believed the church should not be a museum for saints, but a hospital for broken people. A place where the wounded can find healing. A place where the hurting can be held. A place where the doubting can ask questions. A place where the imperfect can still belong. If perfection were a requirement, not a single one of us would be qualified to walk through the doors, including me. People often imagine that a church with cameras and lights must be a place of polished performances. But behind the scenes, you'll find real people dealing with real struggles. People praying for their children, battling sickness, fighting depression, rebuilding marriages, trying to break addiction, or seeking purpose. These are not actors. These are not perfect Christians. These are human beings trying to grow. And that's why the doors stay open for everyone. There was a time when a woman walked into the church with tears running down her face. She had been rejected by her family, judged by her community, and told by religious leaders that her past made her unworthy. When she sat down, one of our volunteers simply placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You're home?" She later said that moment changed everything. It wasn't the sermon, the music, or the lights. It was the feeling of being accepted. That's the heart of Lakewood. Not perfection, welcome. Not judgment, grace. Not exclusion, invitation. Critics sometimes say the church is too open, too welcoming, too embracing. But I believe the church should be the place where the broken feel safe enough to come forward, not scared enough to stay away. I've met people who stayed away from church for years because they were afraid of being judged. They felt too dirty, too sinful, too broken, too ashamed. And when they finally came, they found acceptance, love, and a message that reminded them that God doesn't classify people by their past. A perfect church would be useless because broken people need a place where they don't have to pretend. The truth is, I don't want a church full of people who look good on the outside but are struggling silently on the inside. I want a church where people feel free to be honest. A church where they can say, "I'm hurting, I'm tired, I'm trying, I'm changing, I need God," because that's where real transformation happens, in honesty, not perfection. Some come to Lakewood with doubts. Some come with fears. Some come with questions. Some come with faith hanging by a thread, and they are all welcome. When Jesus walked the earth, He didn't walk past the broken. He walked toward them. He didn't choose perfect people. He chose flawed ones. He didn't avoid sinners. He ate with them. He didn't push away the hurting. He healed them. And if the church is truly meant to follow Him, then it must keep its doors wide open. Is Lakewood perfect? Absolutely not. But it is sincere. It is loving. It is welcoming. It is open. And that matters more than perfection ever could, because a perfect church would intimidate people, but an open church transforms them. If someone walks into Lakewood feeling unworthy, I want them to walk out feeling seen, loved, and valued. If someone walks in feeling ashamed, I want them to walk out feeling forgiven. If someone walks in broken, I want them to walk out healing. That's the mission. That's the heart. That's the truth. At the end of the day, my life is about helping people believe again. There comes a moment in every life, a quiet moment, an unguarded moment, where a person sits alone with their thoughts and wonders, is this really all there is? Is this the end of my story? Is the best behind me? I've spoken to people who have smiled in public and cried in private. People who have been strong for everyone else but felt empty inside. People who were praised on the outside but defeated on the inside. People who appeared confident but were fighting battles no one could see. And every time I meet someone like that, I'm reminded why I do what I do. My life is about helping people believe again, not in me and themselves, not in a church, in God's purpose for their life, not in applause in their own future, because when a person loses belief, they lose everything. They stop dreaming. They stop trying. They stop expecting. They live, but they don't grow. They breathe, but they don't hope. And that, to me, is one of the greatest tragedies in the world. Not that people fail, but that they stop believing they can rise again. The ELIFIs, TEN, Jime, OFTA, Humani, Art. You see, belief is more than an emotion. It's a force, a power, a divine spark planted inside every human being. It's what pushes a person to stand up when life knocks them down. It's what inspires someone to rebuild after loss. It's what drives a dreamer to keep going when the world says stop. But life has a way of shaking belief out of people. A failed marriage, a lost job, a betrayal, a sickness, an unexpected tragedy, a mistake that feels too heavy to overcome. People don't just lose belief overnight. They lose it piece by piece. A little confidence disappears here. A little hope disappears there, until one day they wake up wondering how they got so far from the person they used to be. And that's why I preach hope so passionately, because hope restores belief. Hope whispers, try again. Hope says, you can rise. Hope reminds you, God isn't finished with you yet. There are people I have spoken to who were one encouragement away from walking into their destiny, and one discouragement away from giving up completely. That's how close the line is for some souls. One sentence can break someone. One sentence can save someone. And I have spent my life choosing to speak the words that save, the words that lift, the words that breathe life back into weary hearts. People sometimes ask, why don't you preach more about what people do wrong? Because people already know. They carry shame like a shadow. They remember their mistakes. They replay their failures. They don't need another voice reminding them of what's behind them. They need someone pointing them toward what's ahead. I've seen people come into church carrying decades of regret. A father who abandoned his home and came back 20 years later wanting to change. A woman who grew up feeling unworthy, unloved, unwanted, and didn't know how to break the cycle. A teenager who thought his life didn't matter because he never heard the words, "You are important." Not one of those people needed more criticism. They needed belief. Someone to say, "You're still valuable." Someone to say, "You still have purpose." Someone to say, "God can still use you." Because belief is often the beginning of transformation. You can't build a new life if you don't believe one is possible. You can't break an addiction if you don't believe you can change. You can't chase a dream if you don't believe you deserve it. You can't heal a wound if you don't believe your heart is worth healing. And I've made it my mission to help people find that belief again, sometimes for the first time. I once met a man who told me he had given up on life. He'd been in prison, abandoned by his family, forgotten by everyone he knew. He said he came to church out of routine. He wasn't expecting anything. But he heard the message, your past is not your identity, and something shifted. He told me, that sentence made me believe God still had something for me. He turned his life around completely. And I remember thinking, this is why I preach, not for crowds, not for attention, for transformation. Another time, a mother came up to me with tears in her eyes. Her son had been addicted for years, and she said she was about to stop praying for him. She felt like nothing would ever change. But she heard a message about God restoring families, and she said, that message gave me one more day of belief. 1 year later, her son was sober, not because of me, but because belief returned to her heart. That's what belief does. It opens doors that fear shuts. It creates possibilities that hopelessness destroys. It softens hearts that pain turns hard. It gives people the strength to try again. When people believe again, they become better parents, better partners, better workers, better leaders, better dreamers, better human beings. Belief makes a person kinder, more patient, more compassionate. It restores their smile. It restores their joy. It restores their sense of meaning. People think belief is a small thing. It's not. Belief rebuilds lives. Belief heals hearts. Belief breaks generational cycles. Belief gives people the courage to change what they thought could never be changed. The most powerful moment in a person's life is when they realize God still believes in them. That realization changes everything. It shifts their mindset. It shatters their fear. It renews their strength. When someone realizes God still has a plan for me, they begin to believe in themselves again. And when they believe in themselves again, they begin to believe in a future they once thought was gone. That's why I preach the way I do. Because I'm not just preaching inspiration. I'm preaching restoration, reconstruction, redirection, awakening. Every message I speak is rooted in this simple idea: you are not finished. There is more in you. There is more for you. If my words can push someone back into their purpose, even by 1 inch, then my work has meaning. Some people think God is looking for perfect people. I've learned He's looking for willing people. People who believe enough to try. People who believe enough to grow. People who believe enough to rise after they fall. A perfect person isn't relatable. A believing person is unstoppable. A perfect person can't help others. They intimidate others. A believing person can help anyone. They inspire others. I've met people who looked flawless from the outside, but had no belief inside, and they were miserable. I've met people who had a long list of mistakes, but carried strong belief, and they changed the world. Belief is more powerful than perfection. Belief is more important than appearance. Belief is more transformative than talent. O-N-E-O-P-O, Belbiabain, Everehinges. A dream is resurrected. A family is healed. A heart is mended. A calling is rediscovered. A future opens. Belief is the key that unlocks destiny. And that is why, at the end of every message, after the lights go off and the cameras turn away, my purpose remains the same. I want people to walk out believing again. Believing they can overcome, believing they can change, believing they can love again, believing they can heal, believing they can rise, believing they matter. Because once belief returns, everything else falls into place. People sometimes misunderstand my ministry. They think I focus too much on encouragement, too much on hope, too much on positivity. But I've seen what negativity does to people. I've watched fear destroy lives. I've watched shame silence dreams. I've watched guilt steal joy. So if I can be a voice that brings someone back to life, even a little, even for a moment, even for one step, then I will continue preaching belief until the day I take my last breath. Because sermons may end, but belief continues. Church services may finish, but belief keeps working. Words may fade, but belief takes root in the heart and grows for years. And when someone walks out of those doors believing again, in their purpose, in their future, in God's plan, That is the greatest reward I could ever ask for as we come to the end of this deep and honest exploration of Joel Osteen's journey, message struggles, and the truth behind his influence. One thing becomes certain: Joel Osteen is not just a preacher. He is a phenomenon shaped by faith, humanity, criticism, and an unshakable belief in hope. Whether people admire him or question him, his impact cannot be ignored. His sermons have lifted millions through dark moments. His message has reached those who felt forgotten, and his life story continues to spark conversations across the world. But the real purpose of this video was never to judge him as perfect or flawed. It was to understand the reality behind the name, to see the man beyond the spotlight, and to reflect on what his journey teaches all of us about faith, purpose, leadership, and personal responsibility. At the end of the day, Joel Osteen's influence invites each of us to look inward and ask, what do I believe about success? What do I believe about faith? And what kind of life am I building? If you stayed with me through this full breakdown, thank you. Your time, your support, your curiosity, and your engagement mean the world. Videos like this take hours of research, deep writing, and careful presentation, and your presence makes that effort worthwhile. If you found value in this content, I kindly ask, give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Subscribe for more